Deep within the forest, in the middle of fall, let us go over the garden wall. When it comes to short-lived TV shows, they don't get more short-lived than this, aside from Motor City, and Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, and undergrads. Over the Garden Wall was created by Patrick McHale and aired in the fall of 2014. It started out as a 9-minute pilot called Tome of the Unknown, and gained enough traction to get approved by the blood-sucking studio executives at Cartoon Network. It's a short, compact, and exceptionally well-executed story. Consisting of only 10 10-minute episodes, you can easily steamroll through this in a day. So, go do that. It conducts itself with a rustic folktale charm. It has a quaint, awkward humor to it. Its sepia-tone color palette is incredibly atmospheric and nostalgic. It's beautifully drawn. It's complemented by an absolutely iconic and memorable score, and unabashedly takes advantage of the fact that it's a cartoon. Like I said in my Infinity Train video, that show, Samurai Jack, and Over the Garden Wall are my top 3 Cartoon Network properties. And while OTGW is definitely the shortest and least intense of the 3, it's still a worthwhile and engaging piece that knows exactly what it wants to accomplish and does so in spades. It's its own thing, completely unique from any of its Cartoon Network colleagues. And now, seeing how it's the show's 10th anniversary, we're gonna venture into the unknown and tackle this TV gem. Full spoilers ahead. But, like I said, it's basically an hour and a half, so, yeah, go ahead and watch it. Do it. I think it's still on Hulu. It should be. Fuck, I hope. Over the Garden Wall tells the story of 2 brothers, Wirt and Greg, who get lost in an endless forest called the Unknown. As they trek through these peculiar woods, they encounter many friendly, many off-putting, and many treacherous figures. But the biggest threat on their trail is an entity known as the Beast. And the mysterious man known as the Woodsman is the only one who seems to have any credence with the Beast. So to get this out of the way first and foremost, yes, there are heavy homages and similarities to Dante's Inferno. Both Wirt and Dante are artsy poets who are accompanied by a companion. The character Beatrice, while serving a completely different purpose in this narrative, shares the same name with her Inferno counterpart. The Beast is this story's Lucifer, like that's a pretty obvious parallel, and each episode is theorized to loosely follow the 9 circles of hell the protagonists go through. There are plenty of other more educated channels that can offer a comprehensive overview of the similarities between these 2 stories. I just wanted to point it out. It's up in the air whether or not this was McHale's original intent, but it's hard to discount the narrative and character parallels between Inferno and Garden Wall. But anyway, on to the cartoon. The show is exceptionally well crafted. Each episode is told so thoroughly in these 10-minute segments, keeping a steady but slick pace throughout the story, wasting no time and keeping you locked in until the final second. Story and world building are definitely the strongest pillars in this narrative. Because the story is so simple and straightforward, it's pretty fucking solid for the most part. Its main focus is the odyssey of these 2 brothers and meeting these crazy characters. Not many inconsistencies can arise from that. Part of the reason for that is, the show spends most of its focus on the world building. The opening montage alone does a fantastic job setting the stage, and subtly introduces all of the characters and oddities of this world, and their respective environments. Each shot is methodically intentional. Beatrice in her human form, Mr. Endicott, Jimmy Brown in the gorilla suit, Adelaide and the Scissors, the Highwayman and the Pottsfield Pumpkin People, even the fairy from episode 6 is referenced. Not only that, but it also foreshadows the end of the story with Wirt and Greg falling in the river. It is filled to the brim with extremely subtle blink-and-you'll-miss-it details that pertain to the characters and their place in this world. Patrick McHale planned out everything down to the last moss-covered rock. Each faction of oddities the boys encounter are so full of character and intrigue. My favorite moments in this series have to be from the Pottsfield residents, who are later revealed to be reanimated skeletons. It actually unnerves me to no end how they state that the boys aren't ready to join their little cult they got going on because they're not, well, skeletons yet. But the master of this society, Enoch, reassures them that he'll join us someday. Like, okay, wow, death comes for us all, kids. The unknown kind of has that air of Alice in Wonderland whimsy and curiosity, but still very unsettling and unpredictable. And similar to Wonderland, it's also rather dark and foreboding in its visual display. It all contributes to that spooky yet familiar autumn Halloween atmosphere. There's simply nothing like it. The world building in this show is absolutely brilliant, and what makes it so appealing to me is that it's not always obvious. It can take repeat viewings to notice all of the finer details, contributing to the show's already appealing rewatch value. Theme in this story is also very strong. The most prominent theme I noticed is, oddly enough, hope. And this greatly offsets the unsettling tone that engulfs the world of the unknown. The character who exemplifies hope the most is Greg. Greg is eternally optimistic, lighthearted, and carefree. This is mainly due to his childhood naivete, his kindness, and willingness to trust complete strangers. He's extremely good-natured, and in the latter half of the show, is the most hopeful that they'll return home, whereas Wirt has completely lost hope. To a point where Wirt starts to get covered in branches, initiating his transformation into an Edelwood tree. To stop this, it's implied that Greg selflessly offers to take Wirt's place as a part of the forest, so his older stepbrother can be the one to return home. Even in such dire circumstances, Greg refuses to give up the hope that even one of them can be brought back to the land of the living. This leads to the next theme: death! The looming notion of death surrounds the very fabric of this story, which is rather fitting given the reveal at the end. But rather than being represented by a character, I would say that the theme of death is represented by the unknown itself, which in its own right is supposed to be the show's version of purgatory. In fact, the Edelwood trees are revealed to be the lost souls of those who ventured too deep into the unknown, lost hope, and became part of the endless forest. And soon, that same fate is almost bestowed on the very personification of hope in this story. The themes of hope and death in this show are in a tug-of-war in the final chapters. I'd say it provides the story with most of its narrative tension, and while the show obviously has no qualms about saying that death will claim you eventually, it also emphasizes the importance of hope, and why we need it to combat the horrors and threats of the world. Now, this next theme may not be as prevalent in the story as those other two, but I did find this interesting little detail. Maybe I'm stretching, but I still think it's worth talking about. And that is the sin of fraud. This is exemplified by mainly Beatrice and the Beast, I found. Beatrice starts off the story being completely dishonest to our protagonists, and continues to do so until episode 6. She outright lies to the boys about how the witch Adelaide can help them out of the woods, when really, she plans on trading the boys as slaves for Adelaide in exchange for a magical pair of scissors that can be used to free Beatrice and her family of their bluebird curse. She even has the chance to be honest and upfront with Wirt in the episode Mad Love, but chooses to give him select truths so she can hide her true intentions. Of course, Beatrice realizes the error of her ways and saves the boys from Adelaide, trying to explain she had a change of heart, but it's too little too late, and Wirt obviously feels betrayed. And finally, the Beast is arguably the biggest fraud of all in this story. We learn at the beginning that the Beast and the Woodsman have this deal going on, where if the Woodsman continues to bear the lantern, his daughter's soul will be kept safe in the flame forever. But in the final episode, it's revealed that the soul inside the lantern actually belongs to the Beast himself. and he was lying to the woodsman to keep himself and his control over this domain alive. For as intimidating and omniscient as he seemed, he was just as vulnerable as our main characters. And I think it's interesting what the show might be saying about Fraud. Both characters, when exposed of their sin, are revealed to have a vulnerability which was the reason for committing that sin in the first place. But the true measure of their characters are what they do about it after the fact. Where Beatrice realizes her wrongdoing, feels regret, takes action to save Greg, and helps Wirt rescue him in the last episode, the Beast doubles down on his intimidation tactics to further hide his cowardice, only to be met with his demise. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I thought it was cool. And it kind of ties back to the whole Dante's Inferno, 9 Circles of Hell aspect. I don't know, I noticed a cool thing and I wanted to talk about it. These obviously aren't the only themes in the show, there's definitely others you can extrapolate, but these are the themes that stood out to me the most. And I'm having a hard time thinking of a segue, so I think it's time we talk about some of the flaws. Yes, I know, heresy, blasphemy, burn them at the stake and whatnot, but no media, no matter how good, is free of flaws. Thankfully, this show's flaws are quite minimal, but still apparent and worth bringing up. The first problem I have pertains to the Mad Love episode. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Okay, so Mr. Endicott fears he's going mad because he has fallen in love with a ghost that haunts his mansion, only for it to be revealed that the ghost was actually his business competitor, whose mansion was attached to his, and they figure out they were neighbors this whole time. And, look, I know this is a silly cartoon, but am I the only one who thinks that this little story here is built on water? I know it's a labyrinth of a mansion and all, but come on, you would have had to have come across each other at some point before Wirt, Greg, and Beatrice arrived. I don't know, maybe I'm stupid, maybe I'm being too uncharitable, but this is the only episode that doesn't meet the same standard the rest do. It doesn't really hook me in, I don't find the episode all that funny or engaging. Not a big fan. Another problem I have is Adelaide being criminally underwhelming. She was built up since episode 2 by Beatrice and talked about throughout, but when we meet her, not much is done with her. Sure, she's evil, but not legitimately intimidating evil, just basic cartoon witch evil. I'd argue Auntie Whispers is more intimidating than Adelaide. Even her death, while obviously meant to be humorous, is still so nonchalant and blasé that it almost feels like a footnote in the episode. She ends up being very incidental and not very interesting. So, missed opportunity. And I think the main reason for that flaw in particular is, reportedly, Patrick McHale originally planned 18 chapters for the series, but because of budget and time constraints, Cartoon Network forced it down to 10 episodes. So I don't think it's a stretch to correlate that shortcoming as a byproduct of condensing the story. But even so, I still think the 10-episode format works fine in its own right. There are other flaws, for sure, but I'll briefly touch on those in this next section. So I think it's time I stopped tickling your ass cheeks and get to the last 2 episodes, and really dissect what I love about this show. Episode 9 takes place before Episode 1, and reveals that Wirt and Greg are actually modern-day kids dressed up for Halloween. I absolutely love this twist, because up until now, it's been completely believable that these are 2 19th century children who wandered off the beaten path and got lost in the woods. But given the clever choices of dialogue, the narrative consistency, and the fact that Greg had candy in his britches this whole time, it makes perfect sense. It's a brilliant little twist. Wirt is an extremely insecure and socially anxious kid who perceives himself to be a loser. But in a nice subversion of tropes, the kids he's so intimidated by, including his crush Sarah, are extremely well-meaning and friendly. Even Jason Funderburker, who's just as awkward as Wirt. Wirt's skewed perception of reality is what's ultimately holding him back and draining his confidence. And when Wirt goes to retrieve his poetry tape from his peers at the Eternal Garden Cemetery, he's so wrought with insecurity and fear that he allows his emotions to overcomplicate the situation and doesn't even realize that Sarah is, for one, happy to see him, and two, not at all interested in Jason Funderburker. Soon after, the police show up and jokingly tell them off for being in a cemetery on Halloween. They run off thinking they're in trouble, which leads to the two stepbrothers going over the garden wall. They evade getting run over by a train, fall down the ledge into a river, and transcend the barrier between the living and the dead. Wirt wakes up back in the unknown, in a tree with Beatrice's cursed family, and he finally realizes the error of his ways. He now understands because of his fragile ego and inner saboteur getting the best of him, he neglected the safety of his stepbrother, got them both into this mess in the first place, and vows to save him from the beast. Once he does find Greg, he apologizes, owns up to his mistakes, faces off against the beast, discovers his Achilles heel, says deal with it, frees Greg, and leaves. The second Greg's life was in danger, Wirt locked the fuck in and went from being an insecure teen to a brave older brother immediately. It's definitely a quick shift, and you could make the argument it's an objective flaw, which it probably is, but I can personally suspend disbelief for it because, well, the Devil of Edelwood is turning Wirt's stepbrother into a tree. I don't know. I'd be pretty determined to get my brother back if that was happening. And if you want me to be super charitable, one could say it's a testament to the bravery Wirt was always capable of. He gets to actually show off his intellect and maturity here. The same authority he always tried to exhibit around Greg, he finally has. And he even saves his brother and Frog from drowning in the river. You could attribute this immediate shift of character to the whole 18 to 10 chapters reason I mentioned before, but who knows. The point is, whether it's a flaw or not, I still like Wirt and his moment of badassery at the end. But my favorite character, without a doubt, is the Woodsman, voiced by Christopher Lloyd. I've already revealed that it was the beast's soul inside the lantern and not the Woodsman's daughter, but up until that point, the Woodsman is completely convinced otherwise. He's burdened with chopping down Edelwood trees to keep the soul's flame lit, and you can tell it weighs heavy on his soul. But he genuinely believes there's no way out. And while he is a sympathetic and not to mention a tragic character, the Woodsman is not a scared, loyal servant to the beast. In fact, he hates him, with a passion, and frequently tells him off. But he can never fully act on his hatred because he's trapped by the idea that his daughter is being kept in existence by this all-powerful monster. Still, that doesn't stop him from delivering some banger lines of dialogue. "Hold your tongue or I'll remove it from your mouth" is an exceptionally badass statement. And when the Woodsman finally learns the truth, he makes the painful decision to snuff out the flame, ending this vicious, unnecessary cycle of pain. But don't worry, in the epilogue, the Woodsman gets to see his daughter again in their old house. How exactly? Well, it's not really explained, but I can infer that the beast was holding her soul hostage, and now that he's gone, the Woodsman's daughter is now free to traverse the unknown once again. Is that writing the story for the writers? Yeah, it is. Again, while it may be a flaw for the sake of having a happy ending, this show has earned so much goodwill from me given everything it's accomplished that I can stomach a few narrative leaps here and there. But now, I have to pay my respects to the Beast. I've already talked about him a bit, but he is truly an amazing antagonist. This villain only has, at most, 5.5 minutes of screen time in the whole show, and yet the impact he leaves is unforgettable. unforgettable. His haunting silhouette, his deep, calm voice, his operatic singing, his conviction for his lies, the way he coaxes the characters by preying on their fears. It all works brilliantly to create one of the most effective bad guys in Cartoon Network history. You can tell the people behind Centaur World saw this guy and wanted to do something similar with the Nowhere King, but it just didn't have the same bravado or stage presence. This split-second freeze frame of the Beast alone had more of an impact than the entire character of the Nowhere King. Look at this eldritch horror. That shit is terrifying. The Beast is a beast of a character, and undeniably one of the best parts of the show. But to wrap up the story, like I said, Wirt saves Greg from drowning, they're rushed to the hospital, they wake up safe, all of Wirt's friends are there, and he finally musters the courage to talk to Sarah. And as an added bonus, we get a nice little epilogue tying up all the loose ends of the characters in the unknown. Everyone is reunited and happy with their loved ones. Beatrice and her family are human again. It turns out Enoch was a cat, I guess. And Greg returns his rock fact rock back to where he found it. Everything tied up with a nice little bow. I would say that Over the Garden Wall is a modern fairy tale. It's short, uncomplicated, drenched in atmosphere, incredibly sentimental and heartwarming. It's funny and whimsical, but can also be dark and intense. Everything about this show is so memorable, from the characters to the world building, the beautiful setting and artistry, and of course, the melancholic score that accompanies it are some of the most beautiful, subdued melodies I've ever had the pleasure of listening to. It may have its flaws, but nothing that plunges it into narrative-ruining, shark-jumping territory. Whatever flaws it does have can be easily forgiven due to how well the story is told overall. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It may not be the most high-stakes, edge-of-your-seat experience you'll ever have, but it's 100% worth watching, and it's definitely worth becoming a yearly Samhain tradition. And that's a rock fact. And so the video has concluded, and everyone was satisfied with the review, so the unicorn can disappear for another few months before he uploads again, and so on and so forth. And always remember, yes.